Hey guys, how's it going? So today's video is going to be on the changing of the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States. Let's get started. So the catalyst for the changing of the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia was a man named Jamal Khashoggi. Mr. Khashoggi was a Saudi citizen and a journalist with an American newspaper called the Washington Post. Mr. Khashoggi, although he was a Saudi citizen, he was living in the United States, and most importantly, he was known to be critical of the Saudi government. On October 2nd, 2018, Mr. Khashoggi entered the Saudi Arabian consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, and he was never seen again. He was murdered inside the consulate. Because Mr. Khashoggi was a Saudi citizen, the investigation into his death was conducted by the Saudis. The Saudi public prosecutor determined that his murder was ordered by a Saudi intelligence officer. In terms of what we know about what actually happened inside the consulate, the only other country that released information was the Turkish government, because obviously it occurred in Istanbul. The Turkish government leaked that they had information that Khashoggi's murder was ordered at the highest level of the Saudi government. It's worth noting that the Turkish government was the first government to even put out the idea that this man had been murdered. Prior to this, the Saudi government had been trying to say that he died in a fight, or that his death was the work of rogue killers. And it's also worth noting that US President Donald Trump repeated that rogue killers theory a couple of times before finally determining that he had been actually murdered by someone else. And President Trump has also stated several times that he did not believe that the Saudi crown prince, who is named Mohammed bin Salman, was responsible for the murder of Khashoggi. It was after President Trump made these statements that the Central Intelligence Agency, which is obviously the American intelligence agency, leaked that they also believed that the Saudi crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, was responsible for the death of Jamal Khashoggi. We also know that the Turkish government shared audio recordings that they had captured of the Khashoggi murder with the CIA. The next major milestone in the increasing of tensions between Saudi Arabia and the United States was from the United States Senate. The Senate requested a briefing on the Khashoggi affair from the U.S. intelligence services and the government. The government sent Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Defense Secretary Jim Mattis to brief the Senate in a classified setting. In other words, it was closed door, there were no cameras around, so no one actually knows what was said inside that briefing. The senators present at the briefing said that the briefing had been insufficient and that the person that they needed to speak to was the CIA director, Gina Haspel. They wanted to speak to Haspel primarily because she had access to the raw intelligence. Secretaries Pompeo and Mattis both claimed that they had not actually listened to the audio recording of Khashoggi being killed. After getting a classified briefing from Gina Haspel, several prominent senators, including many Republicans, claimed that they also now believed that Mohammed bin Salman had orchestrated the murder of Mr. Khashoggi. As of recording this video, the U.S. Senate is preparing to vote on several measures regarding Saudi Arabia. They are planning to place sanctions on many of the people named in the killing of Mr. Khashoggi, and they're also debating whether or not to withdraw U.S. support from the Saudi-led war in Yemen, which I will touch on in a moment. First, I want to talk about the disagreement between the Trump administration and the intelligence services. I think the most important thing to underline in this section is to talk about the New York Times report that the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who is a member of his administration, has met with Mohammed bin Salman on several occasions to try and help him get through this in terms of weathering the political fallout from the Khashoggi murder. And that might go some way to explain the difference or the disconnect between the CIA and the actual administration, because Secretary Mattis and Secretary Pompeo basically gave the Senate one version of events, and the person who actually saw or had access to the raw intelligence gave them a different story. And apparently the senators believed the individual who had seen the actual raw intelligence as opposed to the people who were trying to serve the administration. Okay, so now I'll just briefly go over the situation in Yemen as it pertains to United States involvement. So first of all, it's important to state right up at the top that the United States contribution to the war in Yemen began under President Barack Obama. This is not something that is specific to the Trump administration. The war is between government forces which are supported by Saudi Arabia, the United States, the UK, and France, as well as a bunch of other Arab nations, and rebels which are supported by Iran. President Trump has worked very hard to improve relations between Saudi Arabia and the United States and to distance the United States from any relationship with Iran. And that might go some distance as to explain as to why he's working so hard to support Saudi Arabia in Yemen at this time, which makes the fact that the Senate is preparing to possibly force him to step away from that a little bit more complicated. It's also important to note that the conflict in Yemen has become extremely unpopular in the United States and in the West in general due to the fact that civilians are dying in extremely high numbers, and there is a famine and a blockade of Yemen right now, which is causing large numbers of people to starve. Okay, so I just want to talk about two other players in this whole situation, which would be Turkey and Russia. In 2016, there was an attempted military coup in Turkey, and President Erdogan, who is the president of Turkey, maintained control and used the attempted coup as an excuse to imprison thousands of civil servants, judges, journalists, and generals. So, in my own personal analysis, and I'm not necessarily basing this on any particular piece of information, it's a little hypocritical for Turkey to talk about freedom of the press and trying to protect this journalist from being killed by a dictator by bringing his murder to light. It seems a little hypocritical and strange, considering President Erdogan has locked up thousands of journalists in the last 2 years. It could also be a possible attempt to disrupt the cozy relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States, as Turkey would like better relations with the United States and the West themselves, and might find sabotaging other relationships to be more beneficial. Finally, with regards to Russia, I would refer you to the description down below, and there's a link to a video there of the G20 summit recently, where Vladimir Putin was sitting next to Mohammed bin Salman, who was the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. They had what I would describe as a bro hug moment, and that might just be they were friends and they were happy to see each other, but it seems to me, for something to be that public, it's a signal from Russia that he wants to try to improve relations with Saudi Arabia. And now that Saudi Arabia and the United States are on thin ice, that might be easier. I'm sure Vladimir Putin would absolutely love to get his hands on some of the oil that Saudi Arabia has on sale, and it might be a good market for Russia to sell some weapons. Anyway guys, that's it from me today. Thanks a lot for checking out my video. Be sure to like and subscribe if you liked what you've seen, and you'll be updated with whenever I upload something new if you ring the bell on the side. Anyway, have a great day. Take care guys.